my journey, I had no idea I was going to go into ministry. That was the furthest thing from my mind. But as I look back at it and I look at the journey, I can really trace it back and see where God was leading. And so for me, it really starts back in my childhood. And I didn't have a great childhood. It was a pretty broken home. Lots of drugs and alcohol, addictions and abandonment and violence and anger and abuse and things like that. We didn't talk about God. I didn't know who God was. I just had no idea. I didn't know there was a God who loved us. I didn't know what that could look like in my life. But there came a time when it was time for me to leave my home, and it was hard. It was a really, really hard time in my life. And when I left, it was easy to put a smile on the outside, but inside I was pretty broken. And I had a lot of questions and a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness, and I felt unloved and unworthy. And I just want to know why the things that happened in my life had to happen. And if you fast forward a few years, I get married, and Chris and I welcome our first son. And we've got this little baby on our bed, right, all pushed up into the pillows. He's just a couple months old. We're just like Googling over him. And we're looking at this, and I'm looking down at the baby at Hayden, and I look at Chris, and I'm like, man, should we be doing that church thing now? Like, literally, that's how it came out of my mouth, because I just had no idea. So I look at Chris, and I say, he's like, I don't know, I guess. I mean, I went to church when I was a kid, and I'm like, okay, so I think we're going to go to church. So the next day, I go to this amazing woman's house. At the time, I was teaching in Trenton. I was a teacher in the schools, and I would leave Hayden with her, and I would take her kids to school with me. And so when I picked him up that afternoon, I said to her, I don't know, Chris and I are thinking we might do this church thing now. And she's like, well, I go to this church. You might not like it. The music's kind of loud, but you can put earplugs in. But I serve in the nursery, and so I could take Hayden for you. And I'm like, oh, well, that's perfect, right? That was almost 18 years ago. And so 18 years ago, broken JoEllen, just like this shell of a person, this smile on the outside, but really hurting inside, came and sat in that far back row back there. And for 18 years ago, this started, and I really didn't come to church for me. That's not what I was saying. I was really coming for Hayden, right? He was our only child at the time. And I was thinking, the only thing I want in life is to be a great mom. I just want to be a great mom, and later I recalled I wanted to break the cycle. I wanted to have this great family. I wanted to break the cycle that I had come from, and then I learned that my parents ahead of me, they had come from a certain cycle, and I wanted that to end, and I thought church is going to do that for Hayden. But little did I know that church was actually doing something different for JoEllen. It was really JoEllen that was being worked on. It wasn't really Hayden at the time. And as I sat here listening to truth and love and faith and forgiveness and God, and it started to, it literally rocked my world. It changed everything about me. And there became this point where I was sitting and I was thinking, well, if what he's saying, and I'm referring to Brett, I always tell him, he's everything I know. Everything I know about God comes from him, so if he's ever steered me wrong, I guess it's his fault. So. But I remember thinking, man, if this is true, if this is really truth, this is the only thing in my life that has ever given purpose to the pain. It's the only thing that made sense as to why I had to go through the things that I went through. And so if that's true, I'm all in. And that started my journey here at South Point and in the next gen. By this point, we've got 2 other kids. We have 3 amazing teenagers now who have gone through the kids ministry and the youth ministry. And they're the reason I headed towards next gen, because I wanted to be this great mom, right? I wanted to have a strong family, so that's where I headed. And I'll tell you, I love working with kids and students. When you're back there with those kids on Sundays, they love God so much. They're so innocent, they're so open, they're willing to just take in everything that you tell them about God. And then when you work with the teenagers and you have these conversations and they're wrestling, they're thinking, man, this is what the world is saying and this is what God is saying. What does that look like in my life? It's amazing. One really cool story, Brett asked us to talk about something we're excited about for next gen, and I thought I would just wrap it up in a story for you. About almost a year ago, God brings this young girl to my small group at Shift. And the first day she came, I was like, yeah, no way, God. There is no way. She was super crass, obnoxious, rude. Everything I said, she had something super ridiculous to respond to it. Well, I take her to lunch one day, and I find out that her home life has a striking similarity to mine, like almost to the T. And the way that she was coping with that was with addictions. Drugs, alcohol, vaping, and sex. And so when I started to learn this about her, I'm like, oh, I got you, girl. Now I know why you're acting the way you are, because these are the walls that she had put up. But I knew those same walls. So this girl, she keeps coming, and she's coming every single week to Shift, and so I'm just going to keep loving her. And then one day something changes, and I get this message from her, and she says, I'm all in. If what you're saying is true, I tried everything else and I'm broken, and nothing else in my life has worked. So if what you say is true, I'm all in. Will you help me? And that was a few months ago, and ever since that point, that girl has not missed a week at church except to be sick. She comes to church and shift every single week. It gets so much better. She has been clean for almost 4.5 solid months, clean of everything. She got baptized just a couple months ago. Yeah, she got baptized. And every single week, that girl doesn't miss a beat with meeting with me one-on-one for mentorship and discipleship, because you know what she says? I want to break the cycle. And seriously, when I see that is what Next Gen is all about for me. And I don't see them as kids and students. I mean, I do. We see them as kids and students for sure. But really, for me, it's families. I really just see families, because what I know about that student is that when she allowed God to start working through her, and it's been amazing to watch. It's probably the most humbling thing I've ever experienced in my life. When I see God work through her, I know there's a ripple effect happening in her family, in her home, with her friends. And I saw that in my house too, right in my life. When I allowed God to start working through me, it caused a ripple effect that truly allowed me to break that cycle. And so that's what Next Gen is for me. That's what I'm so excited about. That's what I'm just so humbled. I'm so, I don't know, excited. I'm blessed. I'm thankful to be a part of what God is doing here at our Next Gen.